The underworld market smelled of oil and rust. Steam hissed from broken pipes, filling the air with a heavy mist. Dim lights flickered above the crowded stalls, where traders shouted and bargained over strange goods. Among the cages stacked in the shadows, living beings sat in silence, their eyes empty. Some were thin, some scarred, some too weak to even lift their heads. It was not a place for mercy. It was a place where lives were traded like scrap. Tonight, the auctioneer stood tall on a broken crate, calling out the next item for sale. 2 bottles of liquor and 1 shopping cart, he announced with a cruel grin. The crowd laughed, their voices sharp like knives. From the darkness, a small alien girl was dragged out, her wrists tied with dirty rope. She was thin, her skin pale and bruised, her eyes wide but hopeless. Her hair was tangled, her clothes torn, her body trembling as if even standing was too much. The traders shouted insults, saying she was worthless, nothing more than a broken toy. One alien spat on the ground, saying even the liquor was more valuable than her. The laughter echoed in the cold air. Among the crowd stood one man who did not laugh. He was human, tall, with dark hair and calm eyes. His name was Ethan, and he watched the girl with a steady expression. Unlike the others, he did not mock her. He stepped forward, his boots clicking against the metal floor. The auctioneer frowned, wondering why anyone would bother. Ethan placed 2 old bottles of alien liquor on the crate and pushed forward a rusted shopping cart. The crowd erupted in more laughter, shouting that the human was a fool. Buying trash with trash, one of them sneered, but Ethan ignored them, his gaze fixed only on the girl. The auctioneer shrugged, eager to close the deal. The ropes were shoved into Ethan's hands, and the girl stumbled forward. For a moment she looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion. She expected cruelty, a blow, or another order to kneel. Instead, Ethan bent down, loosening the rough rope around her wrists. The girl froze, not understanding. He spoke softly, his voice low but clear. "You are safe now," he said. The words were strange to her. She had never heard them before, not in this place, not in her whole life. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. Ethan placed his jacket gently over her shoulders, covering her torn clothes. The warmth surprised her. She had forgotten what kindness felt like. The traders mocked louder, calling Ethan insane, but the human did not look back. He led the girl away from the cages, step by step. As they left the marketplace, the noise faded behind them. The air outside was colder but cleaner. The girl staggered, her body weak, but Ethan slowed his pace so she could keep up. At last, she whispered one broken word. "Why?" Ethan stopped, looking at her with calm eyes. "Because no one deserves to be treated like nothing," he answered. Her eyes widened, as if the idea was too big for her to hold. For years, she had been told she was worthless, less than junk, but this human said otherwise. The thought lit a tiny spark inside her heart, a spark she had never felt before. Still, fear clung to her. She glanced around, thinking the traders might come to drag her back. Ethan noticed and placed his hand lightly on her shoulder, steady and firm. "They will not touch you again," he said. The strength in his voice made her believe, if only for a moment. The night grew darker as they walked. Lights from the upper city shone far above like stars, but down here the streets were quiet. The girl shivered beneath his jacket, her mind racing with questions she could not ask. What did he want from her? Why would a human waste liquor and a card on someone like her? But the way he walked, calm and steady, gave her no reason to fear. For the first time in her life, she felt she was being led away from darkness, not deeper into it. And so, the girl who had been bought for 2 bottles and a shopping cart took her first steps into a future she could not yet imagine. Behind her, the laughter of the traders still echoed in memory. But ahead, something unknown waited, something brighter. And with every step beside the human, the spark inside her grew stronger. The night no longer felt endless. For the first time, it felt like the beginning. The streets outside the market were silent. Neon signs flickered weakly against the cracked walls. The human, Ethan, walked slowly, guiding the fragile alien girl beside him. Her steps were unsteady, every movement heavy as if her body could collapse at any moment. Her name was still unknown to him, for she had not yet spoken it. They passed by vendors who glanced at them and quickly turned away. No one wanted trouble. No one wanted to interfere with what looked like a strange trade. But Ethan carried himself with calm strength, the kind that warned others to keep their distance. The girl shivered under his jacket, gripping the fabric as if afraid it would be taken away. Her wide eyes darted to every shadow, expecting danger. Years of cruelty had taught her that kindness did not last. At last, Ethan stopped at a small shelter tucked between two tall buildings. It was not much, but it was his. Inside was a clean cot, a small lamp, and a table with ration packs stacked neatly. To him it was simple, but to her it looked like another world. He gestured for her to sit on the cot, and she hesitated, afraid it might be a trick. Slowly, she lowered herself onto the edge, her thin fingers clutching the blanket he placed in her lap. Ethan moved quietly, heating a ration pack in a small metal stove. The smell of warm food filled the room. The girl's stomach growled loudly, and she shrank back in shame. But Ethan only smiled gently and set the meal before her. She stared at it, unsure if it was really meant for her. "Eat," he said simply, his voice steady. She reached out with shaking hands, tasting the food carefully. Her eyes widened. It was plain but real, not scraps thrown at her like waste. As she ate, tears slid down her face. Not from pain, but from the shock of being given something without cruelty attached. Ethan watched her quietly, not pushing her to speak, not demanding thanks. He let the silence grow soft instead of sharp. When she finished, she whispered something faint, almost broken. "Lyra," she said. It was her name, the first gift she offered him. Ethan nodded, as if memorizing it. "Lyra," he repeated gently. The sound of her name, spoken without anger or insult, was strange to her. She had forgotten what it felt like. For a long time she sat in silence, clutching the blanket. Her eyes studied the man who had taken her from the market. Why'd he do it? Why risk the mockery of the traders? Why spend anything at all on her? Finally she asked in a whisper, "Why me?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his face calm but serious. "Because no one deserves to live in chains," he answered. She stared at him, her heart pounding, unable to believe such words. The night stretched on, but in that small room she felt something new. The fear was still there, heavy in her chest, but beneath it was something else. A tiny seed of safety, fragile but real. She lay down on the cot, pulling the blanket around her thin frame. Ethan turned down the lamp and sat by the door, keeping watch. Outside, the city growled with distant engines and drunken voices. But within the room it was quiet, a rare silence that was not cruel. For the first time in years, Lyra's body relaxed. Her eyes closed slowly, sleep pulling her into a dreamless dark. Ethan stayed awake, his gaze fixed on the shadows beyond the window. He knew the slavers would not forget. They would want her back, if not for her value, then for their pride. But he was ready. His past had given him the strength to face such men. He did not buy her out of pity. He bought her because he believed every life deserved a chance. And as she slept peacefully for the first time, he knew he had made the right choice. The night passed. When morning came, the sunlight slipped through the cracks in the walls. Lyra stirred, blinking at the light, her body sore but strangely rested. She sat up, confused that she had not been beaten awake, confused that the blanket was still there. Ethan handed her a small cup of water, his voice calm. "Drink." She drank slowly, the cold water washing away the dryness in her throat. For the first time she looked at him without fear, only with quiet wonder. Something inside her began to change. The chains around her spirit were still heavy, but one of them had cracked. In her heart, she whispered a thought she had never dared before. Maybe I'm not worthless. The sun rose higher, and the streets of the human colony grew busier. Merchants shouted from their stalls, selling food, tools, and strange alien trinkets. Children laughed as they ran through narrow alleys, their voices carrying joy that felt impossible in the darker parts of the city. Ethan walked calmly through it all, and beside him walked Lyra, wrapped in his jacket, her steps slow but steady. Her eyes darted everywhere, taking in the colors, the sounds, and the smells, things she had never been allowed to notice before. The colony was alive in a way the slavers' cages never were. She saw humans smiling, trading, calling out to each other like friends. She saw aliens walking freely, no chains on their hands or collars on their necks. Each sight filled her with both wonder and fear. It was a world she had never known, a world she had once believed was only a dream. A group of children ran past, one of them nearly bumping into her. She flinched, raising her arms in defense, expecting a strike. But the child only laughed and kept running, leaving her frozen. Ethan noticed and spoke gently. "You are safe here." The words calmed her, though she did not fully believe them yet. As they walked, she whispered a question, "Why do they not look at me like the others did?" Ethan turned his gaze toward her. "Because here, you are not for sale." The words were simple, but to Lyra, they felt like a storm breaking apart the clouds. Her chest tightened, and she lowered her eyes, unable to meet his calm stare. For so long she had been treated as nothing. Yet this human spoke as if her life mattered. They reached a quiet corner of the district, where Ethan stopped at a food stall. He bought fresh bread and handed a piece to Lyra. She held it carefully, as if it might vanish. The warmth of the bread against her fingers sent a strange feeling through her. She ate slowly, watching the people around her. Nobody shouted at her. Nobody pulled her by a rope. Nobody laughed at her existence. As the day went on, Ethan guided her beyond the crowded streets into a small garden near the colony walls. Trees swayed gently in the breeze, and flowers bloomed in colors she had never seen. She froze, staring at the sky where birds glided with wings spread wide. Her lips parted, whispering, "Free," though she barely understood the word. Ethan watched her reaction, and for the first time, he saw her eyes soften. He sat on a bench, motioning for her to join him. After a long pause, she sat at his side, her hands gripping the fabric of her borrowed jacket. "What will you do with me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan looked at her with steady eyes. "Nothing, Lyra," he said. "You are free to choose your own life." The words struck her harder than any chain ever had. She stared at him, unable to understand. "No chains, no orders, no price," he continued. "Only freedom." Her heart pounded painfully because she did not know what freedom felt like. She wanted to believe him, but fear whispered that it was a trick. Still, the way he spoke, calm and without demand, gave her no reason to doubt. She turned her eyes toward the sky again, and for the first time, a fragile smile touched her lips. But even as hope stirred inside her, shadows lingered. In the distance, among the crowded market, two dark figures watched. Their eyes followed Ethan and Lyra, their expressions cold. They were slaver scouts, sent to track down what had been stolen from them. Though Ethan did not see them yet, danger was already moving closer. As evening fell, Ethan led Lyra back to the shelter. She carried the small piece of bread she had saved, holding it as if it was treasure. When they returned, she looked around the small room differently than before. It no longer felt like a stranger's space, but something closer to safety. Ethan gave her a small book, its pages filled with human words. "You can learn," he said simply, "if you want to." She touched the pages carefully, almost afraid she might ruin them. No one had ever given her something meant only for her. That night, as she lay on the cot, Lyra stared at the book resting beside her. Her chest was heavy, but not with chains. It was heavy with something new, something dangerous. Hope. And outside, in the dark alleys, the slavers prepared to reclaim what they believed was theirs. But this time, they would not face a weak girl in chains. They would face a human who refused to let her go. The night was heavy with silence. Lyra lay on the cot, the small book still resting beside her. Her eyes closed, but her mind did not rest. Dreams twisted into memories, dragging her back into the cages she thought she had escaped. She heard the auctioneer's voice, the laughter of the traders, the crack of a whip. She felt the cold of the chains against her wrists, the sting of hunger in her stomach. She jolted awake, breathing fast, her body trembling. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the lamp. Ethan sat nearby, sharpening a small blade, his eyes steady on her the moment she moved. "You are safe," he said softly, the same words he always spoke. But Lyra shook her head, her voice breaking. "They will come back." Her fear was not without reason, and Ethan knew it. He set the blade aside and leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, they may come, but they will not take you." She looked at him with wide eyes, trying to believe, but the shadows of her past whispered louder than his words. Her hands shook as she clutched the blanket, afraid it would vanish like all good things in her life. Ethan placed a hand gently on her shoulder, the warmth grounding her. "Lyra, the past cannot claim you anymore," he said. For a long moment, she only stared at him, then finally nodded, though doubt still lingered in her heart. The next morning, she walked with Ethan through the colony again. The sunlight touched her skin, and though she still moved carefully, her steps were less heavy. She stopped to watch children playing in the street, their laughter echoing like music she had never known. One child dropped a ball and smiled at her, a simple kindness that startled her. She almost smiled back before turning away quickly, afraid to feel too much. Ethan noticed, but he did not push her. Instead, he simply said, "The world is larger than chains." As the day passed, Lyra began to change little by little. Her eyes stayed open longer, watching, learning. She even asked questions in a soft voice, about the colony, about humans, about the stars above. Ethan answered patiently, each word building a fragile bridge between her broken past and an uncertain future. At night, she held the book he had given her, tracing the words with her finger. She could not read yet, but she held on to it as a promise that her life could be more than survival. But beyond the colony walls, shadows were gathering. The slavers who had lost their property were restless, their pride wounded. To them, Lyra was not a person, but a possession, and Ethan had humiliated them by taking her. They whispered in the alleys, planning how to reclaim her. 2 scouts had already followed Ethan's path, marking his shelter and watching from the dark. That night, as Lyra slept, Ethan sat awake, listening to the sounds outside. His soldier's instincts warned him. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant footstep made his hand tighten around the blade. He had not told Lyra, but he knew they were being watched. Danger was coming, and he would be ready. He glanced at her sleeping form, her face finally peaceful, and he made a silent vow. No one would chain her again, not while he breathed. The following day, Lyra gathered courage to speak more. She told Ethan fragments of her past, her words shaking as if each memory was a blade. The beatings, the endless hunger, the names they called her. She spoke of the moment she stopped believing she was alive, when she became only an object in her own mind. Ethan listened without interrupting, his eyes steady, his silence strong. When she finished, he said only, "You survived." The word echoed inside her chest, heavy and powerful. Survived, not broken, not worthless but alive. That night, she dreamed differently. The cages still haunted her, but when the slavers came in the dream, a human stood between them and her. His voice cut through the darkness. "You are safe now." When she woke, her heart was still pounding, but for the first time, the fear was joined by something else. A faint, fragile trust. But outside the shelter, in the shadows of the alley, eyes watched her window. The slavers whispered to one another, their voices filled with anger. She was bought with bottles and junk. One sneered, "And yet the human defies us." They tightened their grip on their weapons. Tomorrow, they planned to strike, and inside, Lyra clutched the blanket close, unaware of how close her past had followed her. The fragile hope in her heart had begun to grow, but soon it would be tested by fire. For the shadows of her past were no longer dreams. They were footsteps drawing near. The morning began quietly. The sun spread light across the colony streets, and merchants prepared their stalls. Children chased each other through the alleys, their laughter ringing through the air. But in the shadowed corners, danger waited. The slavers had returned, their eyes sharp with anger and pride. Ethan sensed it before he saw them. His instincts, sharpened by years of battle, warned him. The silence between footsteps, the way faces turned too quickly, the weight of eyes that lingered too long. He guided Lyra through the streets, his hand lightly resting near hers, calm but ready. She did not yet see the danger, but she felt his tension. They reached the market square, where voices rose in busy chatter. And then the crowd parted, as two tall aliens stepped forward. Their armor was worn but strong. Their weapons gleamed in the daylight. Behind them came a third, his face twisted with arrogance. He was the one who had sold Lyra for 2 bottles and a shopping cart. The trader's voice rang out, filled with cruel amusement. "Human," he sneered, "you took what is ours." Lyra froze, her body trembling, her breath quickening. Memories of the cages flooded back, the ropes on her wrists, the laughter of the crowd. She whispered, "No, no, not again," and tried to step back. Ethan moved in front of her, his stance firm. "She is not yours," he said, his voice calm but sharp like steel. The slavers laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. "Everything in that market belongs to us," one of them spat, "and you dare defy us for trash." The word cut into Lyra's chest, her eyes lowering, shame tightening her throat. But Ethan did not move, did not bend. "She has no chains," he said, "and no one will put them on her again." The crowd around them grew quiet, whispers spreading. A human standing against slavers was not something seen often. The aliens smirked, raising their weapons. "Then you will die for your foolish pride," the leader snarled. Lyra gasped, reaching for Ethan's arm. "Please don't fight them." But Ethan only looked at her, his voice low. "Freedom always has a price." Before she could answer, the first slaver lunged. The fight began in an instant. Ethan moved with the precision of a soldier. His blade flashed, parrying the strike, his foot twisting as he drove his attacker backward. The crowd screamed and scattered, hiding in doorways and behind stalls. The second slaver swung a heavy club, but Ethan ducked low, driving his elbow into the alien's ribs. The sound of cracking bone echoed, followed by a roar of pain. The leader sneered and aimed his weapon, a short blaster glowing with red light. Lyra cried out, but Ethan was faster. He grabbed a fallen crate, using it as a shield, the blast scorching its surface. He kicked the crate forward, throwing the leader off balance. The fight raged in the heart of the square, dust and debris flying with every strike. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing. She wanted to run, her old instincts screaming at her to hide. But her eyes stayed fixed on Ethan, the human who fought not for himself, but for her. Each movement, each strike, was proof of the words he had spoken. "No one will chain you again." The leader staggered back, his arrogance twisting into fury. "You cannot win, human," he growled. "She will always be ours." Ethan's blade cut the air between them, his voice steady. "She belongs to no one." The fight ended in a flash of steel and fire. The leader fell to his knees, his weapon broken, his pride shattered. The others dragged him back, glaring at Ethan with promises of revenge. The crowd, silent and wide-eyed, slowly returned, whispers spreading of the human who defied slavers. Ethan turned to Lyra, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. She stared at him, her body shaking, not from fear but from something new. Tears welled in her eyes, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Why would you risk everything for me?" He looked at her, his face calm, though his eyes carried the weight of truth. because you are worth more than they will ever understand. The words broke through her fear like sunlight through storm clouds. For the first time, she did not lower her eyes. She met his gaze, and in it, she saw not pity, but belief. The kind of belief that could rebuild a broken soul. But deep inside, she knew this was not the end. The slavers would return, stronger, angrier, unwilling to accept their humiliation. And when they did, she would no longer be able to stand behind Ethan. She would have to make a choice. The colony grew restless after the fight. Whispers spread through the streets, stories of a human who stood against slavers. Some called Ethan brave, others called him foolish. But all agreed that trouble was not over. For slavers never forgot, never forgave. Inside the shelter, Lyra sat on the edge of the cot, her hands twisting the blanket in her lap. Her body still trembled from the memory of the fight. It was not fear alone that shook her. It was something else, something she had never felt before. Hope. The word itself felt dangerous, like holding fire in bare hands. Ethan stood by the window, sharpening his blade with calm, steady movements. His eyes scanned the streets outside, searching every shadow. He did not need to speak for Lyra to know what he was thinking. They would return, stronger and in greater numbers. And when they did, one man could not hold them forever. Why? She asked suddenly, her voice soft but sharp with confusion. Why do you keep me? Why do you fight for me when I am nothing? Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady. You are not nothing, Lyra. You have always been more, you just never had the chance to see it. Her throat tightened, the words like light against her scars. But with them came fear. Because if she was more, then she could lose it, and that loss would hurt worse than chains. The night fell heavy, and with it came the sound of footsteps outside. Ethan's hand tightened around the blade, his body moving silently toward the door. Lyra's chest tightened, her breath shallow. Through the cracks, she saw shadows moving, weapons glinting under the pale streetlights. The slavers had come. The door burst open with a crash, and the room filled with armed figures. Their leader stepped forward, his face twisted with fury from his earlier defeat. You thought you could steal from us, human, he snarled. But tonight you both die. Lyra pressed back against the wall, fear burning through her veins. Her heart screamed at her to hide, to run, to shrink until no one saw her. But her eyes fell on Ethan, standing tall, calm, unshaken. He glanced back at her, his voice low but steady. Lyra, this is your choice now. Her breath caught. My choice, she whispered. Yes, he said. I can fight for you, but I cannot give you freedom, not unless you take it for yourself. The slavers closed in, their boots heavy against the floor, their laughter cruel and confident. Her body shook, her mind screamed with old chains, but her heart pounded with something new. She saw Ethan's strength, but she also saw his limits. If she did nothing, they would both be lost. Her hands clenched around the edge of the cot, and for the first time, she rose without waiting for a command. Her voice broke through the air, louder than she expected. No. The slavers paused, surprised by the sound. Lyra's eyes burned with fear and defiance. I am not yours, not anymore. The words tasted like fire on her tongue, but they did not burn her, they burned them. Ethan's eyes flickered with pride. The first slaver lunged forward, but Lyra moved, grabbing the metal lamp from the table and swinging it with all her strength. The blow cracked against the alien's head, sending him staggering back with a roar. Her arms shook, her body weak, but she stood tall, the chains in her mind shattering one by one. The room erupted into chaos, Ethan striking fast, his blade flashing in the dim light. Lyra fought clumsily but fiercely, grabbing anything she could, throwing, pushing, refusing to hide. Every movement felt like tearing free from years of silence. For the first time, she was not waiting to be saved. She was saving herself. The leader roared and charged, his weapon raised. Lyra froze for a heartbeat, then forced her body forward, slamming into him with all her weight. He stumbled, giving Ethan the opening he needed. In one swift strike, the leader fell, his weapon clattering to the ground. Silence followed, heavy and broken only by the sound of their breaths. The remaining slavers fled into the night, dragging their wounded with them. Ethan stood tall, his blade lowered, his chest rising with steady breaths. Lyra stood beside him, trembling, her hands scraped and bleeding, but her eyes alight with something fierce. Freedom. Ethan turned to her, his voice soft but full of strength. You chose, Lyra. Her lips parted, her chest heaving, tears sliding down her cheeks. For the first time, she felt the truth of his words. She was no longer only the girl sold for bottles and junk. She was alive, she was free, and she had chosen it with her own hands. The battle was over. The slavers were gone, their bodies broken, their pride shattered, their threats echoing into the night as they fled. The shelter was in ruins, the table smashed, the lamp bent, the floor stained with dust and blood. But inside, something stronger than walls remained. Lyra stood tall, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. Ethan lowered his blade, wiping it clean with calm hands. His eyes turned to Lyra, and for the first time, she did not look away. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her breath uneven, but in her gaze was fire, a fire that chains could never crush again. Silence hung between them, broken only by her whisper, I fought. Her voice shook, but it carried pride. Ethan nodded, his lips curving into the faintest of smiles. Yes, you fought, and you won. The words sank deep into her heart, stronger than any chain. For so long, her life had been measured by what others took from her. But tonight, she had taken something back. Herself. When the dawn rose, the streets of the colony whispered with the story. A human who fought slavers and an alien girl who stood beside him. Some called it foolishness, others called it defiance. But for those who lived in shadows, it was something else. Hope. Lyra walked beside Ethan through the quiet morning light. Her steps were slow, but no longer dragging. People glanced at her, some curious, some with cautious respect. And though their eyes still made her uneasy, she held her head higher than before. For she was no longer a cage-bound shadow. She was someone who had chosen. They reached the edge of the colony walls, where the horizon stretched wide. Beyond lay a world of unknowns, dangers, and possibilities. Lyra stared at it, her hands clenching the fabric of Ethan's jacket around her shoulders. The past still whispered, but now it was not the only voice. A new voice spoke louder, telling her she could walk forward. Ethan stood beside her, his voice calm. Where you go from here is your choice, Lyra. Her heart raced at the words, heavy but powerful. For the first time, no one was pulling her by chains, no one was deciding her path. The fear of freedom pressed against her chest, but with it came something brighter. Courage. She turned to him, her voice quiet but steady. If I walk forward, will you walk with me? Ethan's gaze softened. For as long as you want me to. Her lips trembled, then curved into the faintest smile. Not the smile of someone owned, but the smile of someone alive. That night, they did not return to the broken shelter. Instead, they found a new place, small but safe, a beginning rather than an ending. Ethan repaired the walls with steady hands, while Lyra placed the small book carefully on the table. It was no longer just paper and ink. It was a symbol, a promise that she could learn, grow, and become more than the name they had given her. Days turned to weeks, and little by little, the chains in her heart melted away. She laughed softly one evening when Ethan burned the food, a sound so strange it startled even herself. She learned to walk through the market without shrinking, her eyes open to the world instead of hidden from it. And at night, when she dreamed, the cages still came, but now she saw herself breaking them, piece by piece. Each dream ending not in darkness, but in light. The slavers never returned, their defeat too great, their shame too deep. But the story of the girl sold for bottles and junk lived on in whispers. To some it was nothing more than a tale of foolish humans. But to others, it was proof that no life was worthless, and that freedom, once chosen, could never be stolen again. One evening, Lyra stood at the edge of the colony, staring at the stars. They glimmered above her, vast and endless. She whispered softly, "I was worthless, but now I am more." Ethan stepped beside her, his voice steady. "You were never worthless, Lyra. They just couldn't see your worth." Her chest swelled with emotion, tears sliding down her cheeks. But this time, they were not tears of fear. They were tears of life. The horizon stretched before her, wide and waiting. And for the first time in her life, she stepped into it, not as a shadow, not as property, but as Lyra, free and alive. The girl who had been bought for 2 bottles and a shopping cart had been given something far greater. A new life,